Sitting quietly, doing nothing. Spring comes and grass grows of itself. You see, I really enjoy looking at different cultures. How do they view things? How do they do things? How do they look at themselves and the nature around them? And one of the very interesting viewpoints and feelings about nature that I want to share with you today is that of the Chinese. And it is I find it very exciting. And in this video, we'll be comparing Western ideas and Chinese ideas about nature, about human nature and ourselves. So it's going to be a very exciting video, but I find these topics very exciting, and I'm guessing you also find it exciting. I hope so. And I learned most of these from Alan Watts. I leave some links in the description if you want to learn more where I got this information from. And let me just quickly introduce myself and we get into it. My name is Nagori and I make videos about things that I'm interested in, mainly philosophy, things that I'm learning, lessons that I want to share, and I also make videos about climbing, so hope you enjoy. Now first let's talk about the relationship between man and nature. You see, the Chinese way of looking at nature is completely different from ours, you see, and I think that this is mainly because of their feeling that the human being is not something that is apart from nature. Looking at nature outside of it, being different from it, in opposition with it. But quite the contrary. You see, he has the feeling that the human being feels completely at home in nature. And this is very nicely demonstrated by the painting Poet Drinking by Moonlight by Ma Guan. And I put it here up on the screen. And as you can see, I mean, at first glance, you might think that this is just a landscape. Well, where's the poet? You see, but if you look down there, at the bottom of the painting, you can see the tiny little man there drinking with his servant or whoever that is. And you see, if we were to paint one of these with the title Poet Drinking by Moonlight, the poet would be the most outstanding thing. I mean, that would be the first thing that you would notice. But you see, the thing is that this tiny man, lost in the landscape, represent the whole Chinese attitude and the whole Chinese philosophy of the harmony of man and nature. Not dominating it, but feeling completely home with it. Now you see, our attitude towards nature is completely different. We feel like that we're something completely different from nature. It's something outside of us and that we're in opposition with it. We talk about the conquest of nature, the conquest of space and the conquest of mountains. Now, that is our dominant feeling now, isn't it? That we are using the science and the power of technology and steel and electricity to keep on and fight with the external world, a fight with nature and beat it into submission with our bulldozers and all of that. Now the Chinese would ask, why are you fighting so much? Aren't you grateful for the mountain? That it brought you up to the peak? Aren't you grateful for the space, for the rivers and all of that? You see, I think that our hostility towards nature and our attitude is a consequence of the way that we experience ourselves. You see, we've been brought up to feel that we are a separate, an isolated center of action and awareness. That we are placed in this world that is not us, that is different, that is foreign, that is alien, which we confront. You see, we say in common language that we were born into this world, but in reality you were born out of it. And we feel like that we are an ego trapped in this bag of skin. That who I am is some little guy, between my ears and about 2 inches behind my forehead. That's me. And you see, we feel like that our external world is something completely different from us, and we confront it. And to protect this ego, we mistreat our environment. We look at it as an enemy. We mistreat it. We exploit it. We cut down way more trees that we plant back, and all the plastic and everything that the waste that we're putting out there. For what? To make skibidi toilet flushes and a bunch of newspaper filled with nothing really. So you see, we mistreat it. Do not respect our environment, and we kick the world around in revenge for the feeling that we are like puppets that the world is kicking around. And if we go on like this, it leads to disaster. Because in the process of destroying our environment, we are really destroying ourselves. But you see, this feeling of ours, being completely separated off from everything else, is in complete contradiction with the sciences like ecology or biology. See, ecology, the studies of the relationship between organism and their environment, look at human and their behavior as an action. The point being that we are completely inseparable from our environment. You see, your existence depends on countless many things. The air, the temperature, the way the gravitation between the sun and the earth, the place that it's at, the solar system, everything. Not to mention water and the weather and all of that things. So if those weren't the way that they are, we wouldn't exist. You see, we're completely inseparable from our environment. When we try to explain the human and describe the human organism, we realize that we cannot do it without also explaining and describing the environment which it is in. So you see, we're completely different, we're completely inseparable from it. Just in the same way as bees and flowers are inseparable. You cannot have flowers without bees or bees without flowers. They are really one organism. They go together. They do not exist without one another. Just in the same way, you, as an organism, go together with your environment. Completely inseparable from it. Not something cut off from it, but completely tied together. You go together. You don't exist without one another. And you see, what you do is what the whole universe is doing. Just in the same way as an ocean waves, waves come out of the ocean. The universe, humans, and it's doing you right now in this moment. And you see, we, like anything else, depend on this universal force of nature, or of life, or of the divine, whatever you want to call it. This life that flows through us from a mysterious source, this force that is able to move the blood in our veins. You don't know how you do that, but yet it flows. You do it. You don't know how you grow your bones or secrete your hormones or work your nervous system. But this force that grows your bones, that is behind your nervous system, and so you behind all of your thoughts and actions, you are totally dependent on this force. And that force is really you. And I think that this is much more your real self than your ego, your image of yourself, your identity. But you see, the thing is that we cannot make this force, or this, it, whatever you want to call it, cannot make it an object of knowledge. Just in the same way as the headlights of a car cannot shine on its own wires that function, that make it work. In the same way, we cannot be aware of what makes us aware. Now you see, this is not a fatalistic idea. You see, you might be a fatalist if you think that you are a puppet that life is just pushing around. You're separate from it, but life dominates you. But this is not that. You're not a puppet. You're not just a separate ego. But you are the whole universe, you see. The real you is the whole universe and is doing your organism right here, right now. It's just like how a singer sings a song. And you see, it's just like how two dancers are in perfect harmony with each other. You don't know which one is leading, which one is following. It's like they become just one movement. Or you see that, this is what I've read at least, you see. You don't have to take all of this seriously. Getting back to the point, as we said, most of the Westerners do not trust nature. Of all of the things, nature is the least to be trusted. You must manage it, you must watch out for it. Or otherwise, everything will go bad. And it's just the same with our own nature. We don't trust our animalistic or instinctual nature. You see, you can't trust human nature because if you don't hold a club over your head, you'll go out and you'll rape your grandmother or something like that. Now you see, this is where the Chinese will disagree. They think that nature itself, human nature, the natural man, must be trusted. And this is where both the Taoist and Confucianists agree. They would say, you see, that if you can't trust yourself, you cannot trust anybody. You're completely mixed up. Because you see, if you can't trust yourself, how can you trust your own mistrust of yourself? How do you know that that's also not wrong? You see, you're completely mixed up. You see, they would say that both the good and the bad of human nature must be trusted in full recognition that we are both loving and selfish, both good and bad. See, human beings are complex. We don't really know ourselves. I mean, let me put it in another way. Consider your nervous system. I mean, we haven't even begun to really dig out and know what our nervous system is about, how it works. But you see, behind all of your actions and thoughts lies your nervous system. All of your conscious decisions are based on this thing that we do not understand. And you see, you're much more wise in your own nature than you'll ever be in your conscious thoughts. Because behind those conscious thoughts are your whole nervous system. You see, if you say now that, oh, you see, my nervous system, it's unreliable. You see, it's just a bunch of biological chances, a bunch of neurons that somehow got clamped together, and that's just that. But you see, the thing is that this opinion that you're expressing is a function of that nervous system. So yet again, you're completely mixed up. You see, both the Taoist and the Confucianists agree that nature must be trusted, inside and outside nature. And now you see, when we look at Confucian ideas, we will find a word that represents the basis of human nature, and this word is called Ren or something like that. I'm not sure how it's spelled. This is how it looks like. You see, this word is the cardinal virtue of Confucianism. It's the highest virtue of all virtues. And it's usually translated as human heartedness or humanness. But you see, when Confucian was asked to give a precise definition of this virtue, he refused. He refused to do that. Because he said that you have to feel the meaning of this virtue. You must never put it into words. And you see, the wisdom behind this attitude of not defining rank, not defining this highest virtue, is that the human being is always greater than anything he can say about himself or think about himself. Because you see, if we formulate ideas about our own nature, about our own behavior, how we work, how our emotions work, about our emotions, these ideas are always going to be qualitatively inferior. That is to say, far less complicated and far less alive than the actual author of the ideas themselves. That is us. So then you see, there is something about ourselves which we could never get at. We can never define it. Just in the same way you cannot bite your own teeth or you can look at your own eyes without using a mirror. The idea is that we must trust this part of ourselves. We must trust it. And Confucian would say that he would rather trust human passions and human instincts than he would sometimes trust human ideas of what is right. So then you see, man of nature is therefore a human-hearted man. And the meaning of this is that above all, one should trust human nature in full recognition that it's both good and bad, and it's both loving and selfish. And there's a great example of this wisdom. And Ellen Watts said this example. It's going to be a long quote. It's going to be quite a long quote, but I didn't want to butcher it, and he explained it in a very nice way. So I'm going to read it to you. See, it's about how people go to war. See, he said that when people fight wars, I trust them if the reason for which they fight a war is to expropriate somebody else's possessions and women, because they will fight a merciful war. They will not destroy the possessions and the woman that they want to capture. They want to enjoy them. And that's a war based on simple, ordinary, everyday human greed. The most awful wars that are waged are the wars waged for moral principles. You are a lousy communist. You have a philosophy that is destructive to religion and to everything that we love and value and reverence. And therefore, we will exterminate you, the last man, unless you surrender unconditionally. Such wars are ruthless beyond belief. We can blow up whole cities, wipe people out, because we are not greedy, we are righteous. That is why the goody-goodies are the thieves of virtue. If you're going to do something evil, do it for the plain, honest, selfish motive. Don't do it in the name of God, because if you do, it turns you into a monster. He is no longer human. Sadist, a pure destroyer. So you see, this is the Confucius idea that human nature must be trusted. Now then, let's talk about what the Chinese think of nature. And just as a side note here, what do we mean by nature? What do you mean when you use the word nature? You see, for most people, nature means the bees, the flowers, and the trees, and the mountains. Everything that is not artificial. When we look at the building, we don't think that that's nature. We don't think that's natural. We think that, you see, that's artificial, and that the natural state of man is to be naked. But we put clothes on, but these are artificial. But now you see, let me ask you this. What is the difference between a human house and a wasp's nest, or a bird's nest? Is there any difference? You see, not really. There is a difference as in quality. The difference is in quality, but not in the nature. But we got this idea that nature is somehow something that is outside of us. And we have some nature inside us also, human nature. But as we said, you cannot trust that. So then getting back to the point, what do the Chinese think about nature? You see, they have a word for nature that is quite different from ours. Their word is written like this, and it's spelled zran or something like that. And this first character here means oneself or of itself. And the second character means so. And so the whole figure put together means of itself so. What happens of itself? And we should give the rough English equivalent of spontaneity. We could also almost say automatic, because what is automatic? Because automatic is what is self-moving. But you see, only the thing is that we have associated automatic with machinery, with machines. But you see, this run, what is so of itself, to the Chinese is not associated with machinery, but with biology. You see, you breathe, but you do not know how. Your hair grows by itself. You don't have to think how to grow it. Your heart beats by itself. You don't have to make up your mind how to beat your heart. You see, it's not something that you do. You do by conscious thought. It all happens by itself, and that's what they mean by nature. So the poem says, sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes and grass grows of itself. You know how sometimes we surprise ourselves, you see, when suddenly we feel our own heartbeat, and we realize there's something moving on inside us, something is moving inside of us. And this is totally out of our control, and we surprise ourselves, and we think that we are doing that. Are we doing that? Who is doing this? I have no control over it, but it's me. So then you see, this idea of nature, that which happens of itself, is a process which is fundamentally not under our control, which is happening all on its own, just how your breathing is happening all on its own. And the fundamental thought of the Taoist is that this self-soul process has to be trusted, that nature has to be trusted. So then you see, their principle of nature, the Chinese principle of nature, is called the Tao, T-A-O. I mean, this comes from Taoist philosophy, of course. And this word means the course of nature, the way, the flow of things. And you see, Lao Tzu, a philosopher around 400 BC, he wrote a book about this Tao, and he said about it that the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao, meaning that it cannot be described, it cannot be put into words. It's just a side note here. We were talking about things that we cannot put into words. There's another word in Chinese. It's called li. You see, the original meaning of this li is the markings in jade, or the grain in wood, or the fibers in muscle. And the good translation of it is organic pattern. Now, for example, look at the clouds, you see. When you look at the clouds, they are not symmetrical. They don't come in cubes or form fours or anything like that. But they are not a mess. You know that they are not a mess. You see, a room full of trash and clothes and everything around the place might be a mess, or a dirty ashtray might be a mess. But the clouds are not like that. They have a certain pattern to them that we find amusing. Or just in the same way with water, the foam on water. You see, it never makes an artistic mistake. Water never makes an artistic mistake. Or the foam on water, or the bubbles. They never make a mistake. There's a pattern in them. See, they are wiggly, but in a way orderly at the same time. But it's very hard for us to put our finger in this order, to describe it. See, we cannot really grasp this order. You see, this order is what the artist pays a tribute to when he's painting a landscape. Now you see, take a look at yourself. You're all wiggly, like humans are just as wiggly as trees and clouds and mountains and all of that. But we don't normally notice this. We see a human and we recognize just a human. We're totally wiggly. We're just like mountains and rocks and stars. And now notice this. Look at how the stars are arranged. Do you criticize the way that they are? Would you like them to be different? Would you like them to be sorted out, evenly spaced? No. We love just the way that the stars are arranged. We love it. And they never make a mistake in their arrangement. Now look at the mountains, the ranges. Do you criticize valleys for being low and praise the peaks for being high? No. We just love them the way that they are. They are just great the way that they are, the way that it is. And you see, you are just like this. So it's sad, we cannot put our finger on this order. We know it's orderly, but we don't know why, and we know that it's completely different from a mess. So then we could say that the order of nature is, in this way, indefinable. And the Chinese would say that we know what the order of nature is, but if you ask us, we don't know. We cannot put it into words. Well, someone said this, that I know what time is, but when you ask me, I don't. So then the poem says, you see, there's another great poem, picking chrysanthemums along the eastern fence, gazing in silence at the southern hills. The birds fly home through the soft mountain air of dusk. In all these things there is a deep meaning, but when we are about to express it, we suddenly forget the words. So you see, nature is self-ordering, doing things by itself, but it doesn't really know how it does it. There's another poem that says, if you want to know where the flowers come from, even the god of spring doesn't know. Now getting back to Lao Tzu and the Tao, you see, their theory of nature is an organic one. They look at it as an organism. And Lao Tzu said that the principle of Tao is spontaneity. He also said that the great Tao flows everywhere, both to the left and to the right. It loves and nourishes all things, but does not lord it over them. It accomplishes merits and lays no claim to them. So you see, in their view, nature has no boss. There is not a force, a principle that forces things to behave as they do. But it gets along by being left alone and being allowed to do its thing. And this, in Taoism, it's called Wu Wei. And you see, this doesn't mean doing nothing, but it means not interfering with the course of events, not acting against the grain, not forcing. You see, the great example of this is the art of sailing. You see, compared to the art of rowing. Rowing is a thoughtless approach. It requires a lot of effort, going against the current. But sailing is an intelligent approach. It uses the power of the wind. And you never go against the wind when you're sailing. You kind of tack. You always want the wind to be behind you. So you tack, you use the wind and go along with it. And just in the same way when the crops are growing. You see, there's a great Chinese story. You see, a farmer's son came home late one evening. And the family asked, what were you doing late in this evening? You were late for dinner. And he said that I was helping the corn, the crops to grow. And you see, the next day in the morning, the family went out. And when they went to the fields, they found out that all of the crops were dead. They just died. And they found out that the day before, the farmer's son went out to the field, and for every new shoot of corn, he pulled it up a little, so that it will grow better. So you see, you cannot force it. You've got to let it do its thing, grow by itself. And of course, when harvesting times come, you roll up your sleeves, and then you get to work, then you put in effort. And now if you're interested, I made a whole series about Taoism, where I talked more about the Tao, about more principle, about Wu Wei, not forcing. It's in its totality, it's about 1.5 hours. Very interesting. So if you're interested, I leave a link to it in the description. It's a 4-part series, very great. Now you see, this is a conception of nature as something that you must trust. Outside nature and inside nature. And you see, it's not completely trustworthy. It might let you down. But that's the risk of life. But you see, what is the alternative? You see, the alternative is that no one trusting anybody else. Everybody being his neighbor's policeman and reporting them to the authorities, and no one trusts anybody. It leads to Big Brother. So are you going to trust it? Yourself, your own nature, and the nature around you. You see, it may let you down, but if you don't trust it at all, you're going to get all mixed up in all sorts of regulations and guards everywhere, and who's going to guard the guards, and all of that stuff. And you can't even trust your own thoughts. It needs to be analyzed by a psychotherapist, and then he's going to report it to the authorities and all of that. And it also leads to anxiety. You see, there's a great quote, let me just find it. Yeah, I found a quote, it's from Alan Watts. It says, "Anxiety is the condition that comes upon us when we fundamentally mistrust ourselves, when we mistrust our own nature and are trying to keep such a tight grip on it that we start to tremble, as one's hands start to tremble if you become extremely anxious to hold it still." So then, are you going to trust it? And to finish with another quote from Alan Watts, "To live, I must have faith. I must trust myself to the totally unknown. I must trust myself to a nature which doesn't have a boss, because a boss is a system of mistrust." Now, I hope you found this interesting. I find these topics very interesting, you see. And yet again, if you're interested, I leave some links to Alan Watts' works that I took some information from. And I also leave a link to the Taoist series that I've done on Taoism. If you have any thoughts, any comments, any ideas, if you think what I said is stupid, please let me know. I'm always very excited to read the comments and to read your thoughts. So thank you for being here. Thank you for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed. I enjoyed making this video. So thank you for being here. Have a great day and goodbye.